Hello and welcome to another episode of the Investor Financing Podcast. And we have a great show today. We're going to talk about the book, Level Jumping. Please welcome Mike Simmons to the show. We're going to deep dive on a lot of topics. And I think what we're going to get out of this is how to really scale our business quickly. And let's just dive in and talk about the book Level Jumping. Like what was the basis of the book and give us the framework.
Yeah, for sure. So I was like a lot of people, started real estate investing. I started back in '08, which is interesting because everything was sort of crashing and everyone was yelling, get out of real estate, the news media, right? Which, what do they know? So I was getting into it at that time, sort of naive, didn't know what I was doing. And I did okay. I started to do some deals. And at the time I was flipping houses. And it was going okay, but I realized and I recognized that it wasn't the answer that I was looking for in terms of getting me out of my 9 to 5 because I was doing it as a side hustle. And I really wanted to be out of my 9 to 5, but I just couldn't figure out how to get enough velocity, right, to escape the gravitational pull of the 9 to 5 world. And so I did that for 5 or 6 years. And I eventually, and I was kind of anti-education in terms of like growing my business because my philosophy was Google exists, right? The internet is there. Like anything you want to know about anything is accessible to us. And while that's true, there's a lot of misleading information out there too. As much good information there is there's sort of bad information. And so I was chasing my tail for a number of years trying to figure it out. Until I joined a mastermind. I started taking my business seriously enough to pay for someone to help me understand how to grow my business. And once I got exposed and put myself in the right rooms with the right people and was able to ask questions of folks who were more than willing to lay out the playbook and show me what they did to get where they are, my business exploded. And so I went from doing like 1 or 2 deals a month to doing like 10 to 15, and in some months over 20. And it was exponential and it happened very, very fast. And so I've been on stage, I've talked, and I've given presentations that sort of showed my career. And there's like this trajectory that's sort of modest to sort of nothing, right? Almost flatline with some minimal growth in those first few years. And then it just spikes and it goes straight into the stratosphere. And so the question that I always get, it's pretty reasonable, is, well, what happened right there? I don't really care so much about what happened in the beginning because it looks pretty boring, but what happened right here when everything exploded? And so I was telling these stories and things that I did and how I changed my business and what it took to do that so many times that I just thought I should put this in a book. And then I can just refer people to the book and I can quit explaining it, right? And so in the book, I talk about, it isn't how to get your first deal. It's not explaining the basics of real estate. It's really, the book is written for people who are already in the business. They're doing deals and they're having some level of success, but they don't want this to be an 18-hour-a-day job that they put themselves into. They don't want it to be a rat race. They don't want to have to be in the day-to-day all the time, and they still want to grow their company. So how do you do that? And people don't talk about that a lot. There's a lot of information out there about how to get started, and that's great, and people need that. But there's not a lot of information about, and then there's a lot of information about people who are already making millions, right? Like, I'm making millions now, and this is what I'm doing. But what happens in between there? What happens in between being a solo operator and getting to your first $1 million in profits? And that's what this book addresses.
That's awesome. And I was reading you're big on systems and automation, right? Can we talk a little bit about some of these type of processes and how you look at it, and maybe somebody listening right now or watching this podcast in the future, they can kind of get some notes and cues of things that really projected your business?
Yeah, I would say more specifically, I'm really big on systems and delegation, hiring, and bringing people in more than automation, although automation is part of it. So when I was starting out, I was a house flipper. I was watching all those HGTV stuff, flipping shows and freaking out about how stressful it is and stuff. But I would get a deal under contract to flip, and I would go and I would pick out flooring and pick out paint, and I'd pick out the fixtures and the cabinets and all this, right? I would do the flip. It would go well. And then I would get my next deal and I would go back to Home Depot and start from scratch. It was like I was starting over every single time. There was no process in place. I was just sort of like winging it every single time, which is fine for your first one, I guess, maybe fine for your second one. But if you're trying to scale up and do more than one flip a year, it becomes difficult to reinvent the wheel every single time. And so what I learned, especially from my mentors, once I got in those right rooms and started asking our questions, they're like, real estate and flipping specifically, like single family homes, should not be as exciting and chaotic as it is on TV. It really should be routine, relatively boring. If too many things start getting exciting, air quotes, getting exciting, you're probably doing something wrong. And so I started just standardizing my processes. What paint color do I use? What kind of flooring do I use in like an A, B, or C level house? What kind of cabinets do I use in an A, B, C level house? And so I started creating these boxes that I could give, and I don't mean literally boxes, but like these parameters that I could give my contractors and say, okay, this is an A house. And so this is what we do in an A house. And here are the SKUs and here's everything. And so it really standardized my pricing. It standardized my ability to analyze deals quicker because I knew what I was going to be spending on everything. And it lessened the amount of back and forth communication with my contractors, which is huge because there can be so much lost in translation and too much communication with your contractor. If they have to ask you every little thing because everything's different every single time, the chance of there being an error or a problem or something done the way you didn't want it done is so high. And so standardizing those processes was huge for profitability and for efficiency, but it's also huge for hiring because when you hire somebody and you can show them a standardized process, even a checklist, right? It was always really daunting to me to think I have to come up with this huge manual of how I do things. And it's like, no, you don't. People need some guidelines. They need they need some bumpers on their lanes so they know where to go. But when you hire people and you give them a checklist, a set of guidelines of how you do things, it makes them effective faster. Because prior to that, everything was in my head. If they wanted to know something, they had to come to me and ask me what I do, and then I would tell them. But you can't scale, you can't build a team, and it's really frustrating when you can't empower your team that you're building. You can't empower them to go out and get it done because they can't take a breath without coming to you and asking you what they need to do. And so just systemizing like that is so huge. And I kind of talked a little bit about the hiring process, but I truly believe, like, if you take nothing else away from this discussion that we're having right now, people listening, is growing and scaling a company that's profitable, where there is reliable and somewhat predictable income in that business, that you don't have to do every single thing, that is achieved primarily through people. It's not automation. It's not systemization. It's not processes. It's not manuals. It's the people that you bring in. And so if you bring in people and you don't have a reasonable process to give them, a really good A player will either make those processes and take charge and do it, or they'll say, this place is so like I can't succeed here because it's chaos. No one knows what they're doing. No one has any real clear direction. And good people will leave. And then it becomes very hard to grow and scale your company. I've heard this from so many people that I've interviewed on my podcast. I'm sure you've heard on your podcast. Great people are hands down the most important thing to growing your business.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that was why I kind of really dislike flipping houses, because I never got dialed in like I needed to be dialed in. And it was stressful because my budgets were always over. They're going over. Time was always, there was no system, and it just makes sense. I have SKUs. Here's an A house. Here's a B house. Here's a C house. Here's exactly what it's going to look like. And there's less room for error, right? Because like, what the materials cost, and you now know what the labor should cost. So really, you're not going to have these. I have in the lending business, I have so many clients that come to me and say, okay, it's going to be a $50,000 rehab. And then when they're done, it's 90,000. And the 3-month rehab turned into 8-month rehab. Yeah. So what you're teaching people is like the most important thing about flipping houses. I mean, hands down, you can find a great deal and it could be a bad deal, right? Because you think you're going to make $100,000, you end up breaking even or losing a couple bucks because you mismanaged it and you don't have the people in place. And that is the most important part. And so is in your 7-figure flipping coaching group? Is this kind of the process you teach? You teach you have certain kind of SKUs built in, and they can actually plug and play and just kind of automate, just like you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so from a micro standpoint, you need processes and systems. You need to bring good people in and give them a real chance to succeed and empower them to be able to make decisions based on the parameters that you're setting forth that was successful in the past. That's a micro view of it, right? From a macro view, a company needs, and this is another thing that I cover in my book extensively, you need as a business owner to establish your KPIs or your metrics, right? Your key performance indicators. So you know month in, month out, year in, year out, what's working and what's not. Where are you making money? Where are you losing money? Because a business, especially in the single family space and in the multifamily too, but you need to know where you're generating leads, what types of deals are making you the most money. And so micro sense, yes, all of the project management, all of that team has to be dialed in so you're really, really good on a day-to-day basis. But it's really easy to lose sight of the ball and to not understand your level of profitability. Because let's face it, it doesn't really matter if you make $200,000 net on $400,000 gross or $200,000 net on $1 million gross, right? Like nobody needs to make $10 million. It's the net. And so if you're tracking your numbers and you're understanding the health of your business and where you're weak and where you're strong, what deals you tend to not do well on, how often are you over your budget by $40,000 on a $50,000 budget? Like that's insane, right? Like if you do that too often, but you're not really tracking to understand how off you were, you can't correct it, right? And if you have a project manager, for example, I have a flipping company, say, I hire a project manager and we're doing deals and we're making money, but I'm not really looking into the details. I just know we're kind of being profitable. But then I realize, hey, wait a minute, on every single deal, we're over budget by 50% or 25%. The opportunity, especially at scale, the opportunity for increased net profits, if you can get that under control, is astronomical, right? I always tell my people, like, we do a lot of wholesaling in my business. It's what we do. It's how I went from, doing just a deal or two to $1 million. We did it mostly wholesaling, but I tell my guy on my team, even $1,000 lost through bad decision making or whatever it is, $1,000 on 100 deals, that's $100,000 of profit that we're pulling out of the company. Now, imagine on bigger deals with bigger numbers, you start losing 10 grand on a $500,000 deal. You lose 10 grand, but you do that 50 times. Like, come on, that's a lot of money. You're throwing money. So KPIs they're not, most entrepreneurs do not love tracking numbers. It's just not what we're good at. We're good at finding deals. We're good at negotiating deals and selling properties and renovating properties. We're good at all these things where we make money, but like tracking your numbers for a lot of entrepreneurs is like pulling teeth. It just sucks. It's painful, right? And so you have to understand, as you build your team, somebody on that team, an assistant or somebody, has to have that responsibility to count the beans, right? They have to have that responsibility. And if it's not in your makeup, you have to be at least self-aware enough to know, I'm bad at this and I need to bring someone in who's good, because ultimately this is the instrument panel of my airplane. And hey, most pilots can get a plane off the ground without an instrument panel, right? They sort of know what they have to do. But then you're flying through the clouds, your instrument panel goes dead, and you have no way of knowing what's happening. You could crash. Like you could crash, right? Many people have crashed. And so you have to think of KPIs or the metrics or whatever you want to call them of your company. It is the instrument panel. You may know you're in the air because you haven't hit the ground yet, but you have no idea if you're going up or down or there's a mountain in front of you or something, right? You have to know your numbers, and it's not sexy. It's not the fun part, but you must know them. And if you don't like doing it, hire someone to do it.
And knowing the numbers is on how many calls you're making to sellers, how many emails,
1,000%,
everything. And then on the flip side, if you're rehabbing property, so if you have certain KPIs as a wholesaler, certain KPIs as a flipper, certain KPIs as a buy and hold investor. Yeah,
definitely. And also I will say KPIs, some KPIs are like lag indicators, right? Like how much money did we make last month? whatever did we do last month? There are some KPIs, I call them activity KPIs, where it can be predictive if you know because whatever result you want, there are activities that you know will lead you to that result. So you can measure the result, and you should measure the result, but you should also, as you build your team out, you should be measuring activity. You know how many calls a person or a team has to do in a week to generate the amount of leads that you need to get you to your financial goals. And so we measure activity KPIs as well. And it's different for everybody on the team. They have their own activity, but you have to measure activities to get to the results that you expect to get to.
Yeah, that's really good. And I can tell you what, that's where I'm extremely weak. I'm more of a creative idea person.
You're a visionary.
Yeah.
You're a visionary, man. That's most entrepreneurs are, but you need someone who is an operator or someone who can help you with the operations part of it, because I am the same way. Like I always tell people, I like to build and launch rockets. I do not like maintaining them when they're in orbit. I just can't. It's mind-numbingly hard for me to do that, but I love building and launching them, right? And so I need someone around me who can help maintain.
Yeah. And I think the problem with entrepreneurs like myself, it's like I have my lending business, so I have to do the marketing and keep that going. And then I my buy and hold business. And it's like, okay, I'm buying out of state, and that has its own problems. Like if I'm in Las Vegas and I'm buying in Pennsylvania right now, I'm setting up systems, getting the right property managers for the right.
Yep.
It's really challenging to have. It's almost worse being an entrepreneur like this, because you're kind of, until you get the pieces in place. And that's the thing. Yeah. Each little business you have has to have the systems and you have to measure it and you have to track it. Cause if not, it's never going to get you where you need to go. And I think this is like totally the most important thing about, and this is not just for real estate, any kind of business. Right? I mean, these are like the fundamentals of a business to grow. That's totally. Like, it's so true.
You're listening to the Investor Financing Podcast. We'll be right back after this break.
Hello, Beau here, host of the Investor Financing Podcast. Are you a lender, real estate professional, or vendor that provides products or services within the real estate investing and business owner space? We are offering a few sponsorship opportunities to get in front of a highly targeted audience. If you're interested, please click the link below for further information. We look forward to talking with you. Thanks. Make it a great day. So why don't we talk about, so you have a podcast called Just Start Real Estate. Talk to us a little bit about that. And then let's dive into your 7-figure flipping as well.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. So the podcast is called Just Start Real Estate. I started it back in 2013. I'm pushing 600 episodes right now. Interviewed some huge people, had a lot of fun doing it. And I really started it because when I got started in real estate and now still, I'm what you call an introvert. I wasn't somebody who loved going to meetups and mingling and get to be buddies with all the local investors. Like, that's just not me. And so I would go to meetups and I would sort of sit there. My wife and I would go and we would talk to each other, and then we wouldn't ever get to know anybody. And so I didn't really get a lot of answers to some of the basic questions that I had when I was starting out, because I felt stupid asking them, and I'm just not a great mingler. I'm not social. And so once I sort of had some level of success and I was started getting some traction and understanding this whole investing world, I started the podcast really just to sort of help people out who were like me, who needed a place to go to get some of their, embarrassing questions or newbie questions or whatever it was. That's why I started the podcast. And since then it's grown, and my listeners are probably a healthy mix of like intermediate to beginners, somewhere in there. There's some folks doing some big stuff, but selfishly at this point, I do the podcast because I know it's helpful, but I've met so many cool people and so many people that have benefited me personally and professionally. And it's just a great, especially now that I've been doing it a while, it's gotten a good reputation. It's gotten some traction. And so people can find it a little easier. And so I get to interview really cool people that I would never, it's funny. You do a podcast like this, Beau, and you get to talk to people and kind of get information from them and learn from them where they would have never picked up the phone because they don't know you. And it's like, how would you ever talk to this person for an hour? But I get to, and you get to sit down with people for an hour and really pick their brain and get some good stuff from them. So that's why I do it. It's a fun podcast for me to do. I've been doing it a long time. It's relatively effortless for me at this point, but but it's growing. It's still growing and doing really, really well. So people are enjoying it. As long as people are downloading it and enjoying it, I'll keep doing it.
That's awesome. And then seven figure flipping. Can you?
Yeah. So seven figure
Yeah.
flipping. Yeah, it's the mastermind that I joined back in 2015 that turned everything around for me. And it was so helpful for me. I always feel like I'm talking about, if anybody listening is old enough to remember the Hair Club for Men, where the guy said, I'm not only a client, I'm not only the owner, I'm a member. So I was a member of this mastermind. It was a high ticket mastermind, super high ticket. So interestingly enough, I was against paying for education early on. And the first thing that I paid for in terms of education was a $25,000 ticket that I paid. So it's kind of weird. There usually people ramp up to something like that, but I paid it for a year. And but I went from I was on like a $200,000 run rate when I joined, and I ended up doing over $1 million in profit that year. So was it worth it? Of course, it was a multiple of, X times of what I was paying. It was worth it. But the bottom line is, what I learned in that mastermind was so valuable to me that I started volunteering to help and coach other people in the mastermind. And I did that for a few years, and ultimately got into a position of equity, and I bought into the company as an owner. And I'm still an owner of that company, and we still have 300 plus businesses inside of that community that are doing huge deals. Like, they're professional investors. Like, these are not, for the most part, not hobbyists. These are like people running full-time investing companies, and it's huge. And so I know that everyone can't necessarily write that check for $25,000. I get that. And so I created a program called the 7-Figure Investor. And the 7-Figure Investor is me. And what I show people inside of this much, much more affordable program, it's really affordable for anybody, is I take the lessons and everything, the concepts that's learned in 7-figure flipping at a $25,000 price tag, and I sort of distill that and curate it down to something that's a little bit more digestible in the short term. And so this program is designed to help people get from exactly what my book does, but in a more one-on-one session. It helps people get from being like a solo entrepreneur doing a few deals here and there to a company that's scaled up doing 7 figures or more, or has that capacity, or has that framework to do 7 figures or more. And I put all this into a 4-week course that's very, very easy to understand, but incredibly packed with information that will give you everything you need to go from just doing a few deals to scaling up, building a team, setting a framework, hiring and knowing how to hire and train people, and setting up those processes to give you a business that can make over 7 figures. And most importantly, without you doing everything and you being on that hamster wheel. And I just think it's important to get that information in people's hands, because some people have gotten to the point where they know how to do a deal. They know how to find a deal. They hit a glass ceiling. They don't know what to do after they get to that point. How do you go from being, because by the way, what gets you to your first stage in real estate of you're doing everything, you're finding all the deals, you're negotiating, you're hiring contractors, you're getting it sold, right? That gets you to a point. But what gets you there will not get you to the next step. Because when you start bringing people on and building a team, it's a different skill set than what it took you to get to where you currently are. And so I help kind of guide people through that process and set them up for success.
And do you like, I know you do mostly wholesaling. So you do wholesaling. What does your business look like? And is return on investments, is that your actual operating company?
Yeah, return on investments is my real estate investing company. And so I flipped for the first 6 years of my career. And while I wasn't doing it at an astronomical scale, I still did over 100 flips, right? So I have that experience. We still flip properties here and there strategically. It's not our main mode. We mostly do wholesaling. We've gotten into doing a lot of creative financing, land contracts, and things like that. So we're kind of diversifying a little bit and moving with the cheese, so to speak. We're in a different market now than we were 5 years ago. And so you have to change your approach a little bit. So that's what my company does now. It's probably, at this point, it's probably 70% wholesaling, 5% flips, and the rest of it's like land contracts. And we're starting to move a little more toward creative financing and land contracts because there's just so much out there right now. So we do that. And I have a lending company that I do lend private money, or not private money, hard money, I guess is what it'd be called. It's a little bit more structured than private money, but we do some hard money lending. And that's a majority of the real estate that I'm doing right now. I have a daughter that's a little older, and she wants to do some short-term rentals because obviously it's kind of a hot thing right now. And so I'm helping her get that business started and kind of building that with her, because it's a lot of fun just working with your family. But yeah, man, that's what I do. And the 7-figure investor, like I said, is really a culmination of not only just my experience, but the hundreds of investors that I've helped over the last 6 years. It kind of takes all that knowledge, all that hindsight, which is huge, right? People always say hindsight's 20/20. Well, what if you had the hindsight of 100 people that came before you, what they did right, what they did wrong, and that could be presented to you in a format that really, actionable. And so if it's okay if I mention the URL of that program.
Please.
Okay. Yeah. So it's called the 7-figure investor. So you go to 7figureinvestor.com, and that's the word 7, not the number. So you spell out the word 7, 7figureinvestor.com. You can check it out and see what it's all about. But yeah, man, that's what I'm doing. I'm still an active investor, and I think that's important for people who teach how to do this stuff. You really hope it's not someone who did it 20 years ago and since hasn't, bought or sold a property in that amount of time, because things change. The market changes, certain things change. Some things stay the same, but man, something's changed. So you want someone who's kind of out there right now swinging the sword to tell you what to do.
Yeah. I mean, as I get older, I actually spend more money on masterminds and learning than I ever did. And like,
me too.
You would think, well, why are you doing that? Because you don't know what you don't know. Right. And like, why wouldn't you exponentially speed up the learning curve? Because you might do your first flip and lose money and never do another flip because you just didn't know the basic systems. I mean,
totally.
With my lending business, I get some calls from people and I'm like, oh my God, you should really go to school before you do this flip. But it's kind of scary, but I guess it's what you deal with. And that's why, I mean, people at minimum should be plugging into podcasts and really learning.
At minimum. Yeah.
But if you're treating this seriously, I think I heard you say the word seriously. And it's so true. Like if you're serious about your real estate investing business and leaving your 9 to 5, then you should invest in yourself. And that's what I'm learning to do. It's like, I'm getting coached, business, high performance coach, real estate. Yep. I mean, wherever you want to excel, and then bringing in the right people. And that's a big part too, which I'm starting to do. I have virtual team members in the Philippines, and that's a skill set in its own, just trying to identify
100%.
People. But there's
absolutely. I mean, going back to like learning and getting coached and stuff. Do you know anybody personally who has had sustained success that are not learners, that don't read, that don't hire coaches? I don't know anybody who doesn't try to always learn and get better if they're successful and have had success. I don't know anybody. I know a lot of people that are not successful who don't hire coaches and don't learn and don't, spend their time trying to learn. They spend it watching, HBO Max and Netflix, which is fine. I do too. But I also spend a lot of time trying to learn and get better. You just, a shark is swimming or it's dying. And I think businesses and people are the same way. You're either growing, you're dying, one of the two. So take a choice.
And an interesting point now, like we are at a different time in the market, real estate market. Let's face it, it's been a bull run. We have a lot of crazy stuff going on. There's a war, there's inflation, there's COVID. But at the end of the day, there's still real estate deals. But I liked how you said you kind of like move the cheese a little bit, because things change and maybe we're going to start seeing short sales again. And that's why you need all these tools in your tool belt, where you said, I'm doing land contract deals. I'm doing, subject to deals. The creative financing space. So it's like investors out there, like you always got to learn. Like I've only really been a flipper and a buy and hold investor, like, well, why wasn't I wholesaling? Because that's probably better. I'm probably better suited to be a wholesaler, because you get in and you get out, right? And like, I don't have to deal with this 5-month rehab project. And so you got to find, so I keep on telling myself, you should be looking at wholesaling, because that's the market. It's really kind of makes sense. You buy low and you sell high. Like, and that's basically, and you don't need credit.
It's a lot like day trading, man. It's a lot like day trading. Like we find these deals and we move them fast. You mentioned it, is you might be better suited for it. What I learned over hiring people, and when I hire, I think that the tools like the DISC and the Colby tests, and there's something called Culture Index, like some of these assessment tools, they're not Bible, they're not perfect, but I think they are a tremendous tool when you're hiring. And so I've taken all those tests before, multiple times, and all of them, every single one of them, tells me you are very impatient. You're very driven, but you're very impatient, and your attention to detail is not spectacular, right? And so wholesaling is so set up for me. Like, I get in and get out. I don't have time to get bored. It's exciting. Nothing stays the same for more than a week or two. I like it, and I always use the philosophy, the people who got rich during the gold rush are the people selling the axes and the picks, right? I'm selling the axes and the picks to the gold miners, and people are going out there and making great profits on properties that I'm selling them. But I do like getting in and out. And I did go through 2008, 2009, 2000. I saw what happened to people who hold not hold long term, but who have long-term projects, right? They're renovating for 18 months. Those are the people who got caught. And so you have to be careful. People are doing it still, and many people will be fine if things turn. They just will. But the idea is knowing where you are in the market and being aware of it. It's just awareness is half of it. People who got caught off guard back in 2008 lost money. But, a lot of people live through that and they're eyes wide open right now. So that's good.
This has been a great interview. You have a ton of energy. I learned a lot, and I give everybody the website that they can go check you out at again, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's called sevenfigureinvestor.com. The word seven spelled out, sevenfigureinvestor.com.
And any closing words, personal development tips or any kind of rituals you're doing on a daily basis to kind of up your game?
I would say, up my game. Now you just changed my answer. So the only ritual I think I do every day is have coffee in the morning with my wife. That's a great ritual. Personally, you should sit down and have good quality time. However, I will say the one thing that I hear a lot right now is people asking me constantly, and I'm sure that you get this all the time. I want to get started in real estate, but should I wait? Is this the wrong market to get started? And my answer is always the same. The market is never good or bad. It's completely agnostic. It is what it is. It's never a bad time to get into real estate. You just have to understand where you are in the market cycle, get a little education, and approach this market in a way that's conducive to making money. The market's going to change. So whatever we're doing now may not work the same in a year or two or three. And so don't wait to get started, right? I called my podcast Just Start Real Estate for a reason. Every time I listened to someone who I thought was worth listening to, had success, that I believed I needed to follow them and listen to them, they always have the same advice when they're being interviewed on podcasts like this. The host would ask them at the end, do you have any parting advice? And almost to a man, and they would always say, just start, just start, right? You can't sit on the sidelines forever and expect anything to happen. Get in the game and get started. Now is the time, the best time to start anything 10 years ago. The next best time, right now. So get started.
All right. That was amazing. Everybody, thanks for staying to the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode. And thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.